Jai Om Shnupada Brahmamsa Pratyaka Acharya Shtota Shatashi Shrimatis Divine Grace Aparachana Rinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BPT Bhaktivedanta Institute Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Shnupada Brahmamsa Pratyaka Acharya Shtota Shatashi Shrimatis Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai. Nama Acharya Srila Haridasa Thakur Ki Jai. Premise Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Dadara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vardhabhumi Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Navadvip Mayapur Ki Jai. Purushottama Chaitanya Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Shri Ayodhya Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Samavrita Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Harinama Sankirtana Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bo. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glory to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Praglada Lada Dayine. Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha. Shilantanka Nakalaye. Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha. Yato Yato Yamitato Narsimha. Bahir Narsimha Hirdaye Narsimha. Narasimha Madim Saranam Prapate. Tavakara Kamala Vare Nakam Abhuta Shringam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanuvringa Keshavatita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Kara Kamala Vare Nakam Abhuta Shringam Lita Hiranyakashipu Subrenga Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jayo Keshavatita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jayo Narasimha De Jayo Narasimha De Jayo Narasimhadev, Jayo Narasimhadev. Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. भक्तनाथ भगवान नरसिंहदेव भगवान की, भक्त प्रहलाद महाराज की, शीला प्रभुपाद की।
वृंदाय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवस्य च विष्णु भक्ते प्रते देवी सत्यवत्यै नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवस्य च विष्णु भक्ति प्रते देवी सत्यवत्यै नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवस्य च विष्णु भक्ति प्रते देवी सत्यवत्यै नमो नमः। वृंदा देवी तुलसी महारानी की। नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो ए अभिलाषी ब्रजे राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो ए अभिलाषी जे तो मारा शरण लो तारा वंशा पूर्ण होय तुम्हें कृपा कोरे करो तारे वृंदावन वासे मोर ए अभिलाष विलास कुंजे देवास আমি নয়নে হেরি રેબ સદા જુગલ રૂપ રાસે એ નિવેદન ધરો સખી અનુગતા કરો સેવા અધિકાર દે કોરો નિજ દાસે દીન કૃષ્ણ દાસ કોએ એ જેનો મોરા હોય શ્રી રાધા ગોવિંદ પ્રેમે સદા જનો ભાસે શ્રી રાધા ગોવિંદ પ્રેમે સદા જનો ભાસે જાને કાને ચ પાપાને બ્રહ્મ હત્યાદિકાને ચ તાની તાની પ્રાણાક્ષંતે પ્રદક્ષિણ પદે પદે યા જાને કાને ચ પાપાને બ્રહ્મ હત્યાદે કાને ચ તાને તાને પ્રાણાક્ષંતે પ્રદક્ષિણ પદે પદે હરે કૃષ્ણ 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 હરે 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 રામ 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 હરે 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 કૃષ્ણ 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 હરે 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 રામ 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 હરે 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 કૃષ્ણ 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 હરે 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 રામ 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 હરે 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 કૃષ્ણ Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Oh Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Brinde Devi, Jaya Brinde Devi, Brinde Devi, Jaya Brinde Devi. Jaya Vrindavana Dham, Jaya Vrindavana Dham, Vrindavana Dham, Jaya Vrindavana Dham. Jai Prabhupada, 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 Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Srila Gurudev. Vrindaye Tulasi Devyaye Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prate Devi Satyavatte Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulasi Devyaye Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prate Devi Satyavatte Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulasi Devyaye Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prate Devi Satyavatte Namo Namaha. Vrinda Devi Tulasi Maharani ki.
Oh Tulasi, beloved Krishna, I bow down before you again and again. My desire is to continue service to Sri Radha and Krishna. Whoever takes charge of me has wishes fulfilled. Bestow mercy upon him and make him a resident of Vrindavana. My desire also grant me residence in the precious groves of Shiva and Dhaam. Thus leading my wish, I shall always behold the beautiful paths of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me follow Kara dance of the Vraja. Please give me the preached devotion service and make me my own maid servant. This very fallen lowly servant of Krishna praise. May I always swim in the love, Shri Radha and Govinda. Srimati Tulasi Maharani ki jai. There are 10 fences in the matter of chanting holy names to be avoided, and they are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the devotees who have dedicated their life for propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. To consider the name of the demigods like Lord Shiva or Brahma to be equal to independent the name Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the order of spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature pursuing the Vedic version. 5. To consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation to the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on strength of chanting holy name. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna one of the auspicious ritualistic activities, offering the Veda the fruity activities, karma, ganda. 9. To instruct a faithless person about glorious holy name. 10. To not complete faith in chanting holy names, and to maintain material attachments in understanding so many instructions on this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to Vaishnava Catholic arrogance these 10 offenses, you ought to quickly achieve desired success, Krishna Prema. Now let us offer most humble obeisance unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are the desire trees who can fulfill to everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vancha kalpa Shri Chaitanya Shikshastakam ki jai. Cheto Darpana Marjanam Pavamahadavakni Nirvapanam Shriya Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam Vidyavatu Jivanam Anandam Pudivardhanam Pratipadam Purnamita Sadanam Sarvatamasnapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakali Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatra Pita Niyamita Smaranena Kalaha Etadeshi Tava Kripa Bhagavam Mamapi Durudevami Desham Yahajanina Nurakaha Turinatapi Sunichena Tarorapi Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadaharihi Na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim, kavitam va jagadisha kamaye. Mama jammani jammanishvare, pavata bhaktir haituki tavayi. Ayinanda tanuja kinkaram, patitam mam vishame bhavam buddha. Kripaya tava pada pankaja sthita dhuri satesham vichintaya. Nayanam garadashrudaraya, vadanam gadgada rudaya gira. Puraka nichitam vapurukada tava nama grahane bhavishati yuga itam nimishena chakshusha pravisha itam shunya itam jagat sarvam govinda virahe name ashirishava padaratam pinnastumam adarshanam marmhatam karotuva yatha tatha va vitathatu lampato madprananatha susa eva na paraha Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Chaitanya Shikshastakam ki jai. Glory to Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes fire of conditional life for repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads a rays and benediction moon. It is life of transcendent knowledge. It increases ocean transcendent bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which always anxious. Oh my Lord, your holy name alone grants all benediction to human beings. Thus we have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, they have vested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. Oh my Lord, out kindness enables us to easily approach you by holy names, but I'm so unfortunate I have no attraction for them. One should chant holy name of the Lord in humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more taller than the tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready of all respect others. In such a state of mind, one can chant holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor to desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotion service, birth after birth. O Son of Marananda Krishna, I'm eternal servitor. Yet somehow I fall in the ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me at one's Adam's or lotus feet. Oh my Lord, while my eyes bedeck with tears of love flowing constant when I chant the holy name, while my voice choke up and hair my body stand and the recitation of your name. O Govinda, feeling of separation becomes a moment to be like a great millennium. Tears are flowing from eyes like torrents of rain, and I'm feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything, everything, for he is always my worshipable Lord, unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Shastakam ki jai. Shri Mangala Aarti prayers ki jai. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Omritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragnatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pachadate Shatarine Nama Om Shnupadaya Krishna Pisthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati iti namine Shri Varshabhani Videvi Daitaya Kripaptaye Krishna Sambhana Vijnana Daine Prabhavin Namaha Madhuryo Jala Premadya Shri Rupa Nuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karana Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dina Darine Rupa Nuga Viruddha Pasiddhanta Dvanta Harine Namo Gaura Kishoraya Sakshat Vairagya Murtaye Vipalambara Sambodhe Padam Pujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachidananda Namine Gaura Shakti Swarupaya Rupanugavarayate Gaura Virbhava Bhumistvam Nirdishta Sajanapiyaha Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Shri Jagannathaya Te Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitanam Bhavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaurateshe Namaha Panchatattvatamaham Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam He Krishna Karna Sindho Dinapanto Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jatam Sratoro Pangor Mamamanda Matirkati Masarvasva Padam Bojo Radha Madana Mohano Divya Vrindarana Kaupaturmadaha Shimadra Nagara Singhasanasto Shimadradha Shila Govinda Devo Prishtaripi Sevamano Smarami Shiman Rasara Sarampi Vamsivata Tatastitaha Karsham Vinu Saner Gopir Gopinatha Shiyestunaha Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Datara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Mangalacharna prayers ki jai. Shri Brahma Samhita prayer ki jai. Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam Chintamani Parakara Satmasuka Praviksha Lakshariteshu Surabi Rabi Palayantam Lakshmi Sahasra Shatasam Parmasevyamanam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Venung Kavanantam Aravinda Talaya Daksham Parharvatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Gantarpa Koti Kamaniya Vishesha Shopam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Alola Chantakala Savanamada Vamshi Ranankadam Panayakeli Kala Vilasam Shamam Tripanka Lalitam Yata Prakasham Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Angani Yasya Sakalindriya Vittimanti Pashanti Panti Kalayanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chimmaya Satuchila Vigrahasya Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Advaitam Achotam Anadi Mananta Rupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vedeshu Durabam Adurabam Atma Bhakto Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Pantastu Koti Shatavasara Sampragamyo Vayurathapi Manaso Munipangavanan Sopyasti Yapapada Simya Vichinta Tatve Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Ekopya Sora Chayitum Jagadanta Kotim Yachakti Rasti Jagadanta Chayayatantaha Antantarastha Paramanu Chayantarastham Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Yad Bhava Pavitadiyo Manujastateva Samprapya Rupa Mahimasana Yana Pushaha Suktaryam Eva Nikama Patitai Stuvanti Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Ananda Chimmarasa Patipavitapi Stapi Evan Jarupataya Kalapihi Goloka Eva Nivasatya Kilatma Bhutto Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Premanjana Churuta Bhakti Vilochanena Santa Sateva Hitayeshu Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundam Pincha Guna Swarupam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami Ramadi Mutishu Kalanyamena Tishtan Nanavatarama Puvaneshu Kintu Krishna Swayam Samapava Parama Pumam Yo Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Pajami. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, the Supreme Godhead, he has an original.
He has no other origin. He is the prime cause of all causes. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor who is tending the cows, yielding all desire in abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of purpose trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds of thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is adept in playing on his flute with blooming eyes like lotus petals, with head decked with peacock's feather, with a figure of beauty tinged with hue of blue clouds, and his unique loveliness charming millions of cupids.
I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, around whose neck is swinging a garland of flowers beautified with the moon locket, whose two hands are adorned with the flute and jeweled ornaments, who always revels in pastimes of love, whose graceful threefold bending form of Shyamasundara is eternally manifest.
I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose transcendental form is full of bliss, truth, substantially, and is thus full of the most dazzling splendor. Each of the limbs of that transcendental figure possesses in himself the full-fledged functions of all the organs and externally sees, maintains and manifests the infinite universes, both spiritual and mundane.
I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is inaccessible to the Vedas but obtainable by pure unalloyed devotion of the soul, who is without a second, who is not subject to decay, is without a beginning, whose form is endless, who is the beginning and the eternal Purusha, and he is a person possessing the beauty of blooming youth.
I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, only the tip of the toe of whose lotus feet is approached by the yogis who aspire after the transcendental and betake themselves to pranayama by drilling the respiration, or by the jnanis who try to find out the non-differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of mundane extending over thousands of millions of years.
He is an undifferentiated entity, as there is no distinction between potency and the possessor thereof. In his work of creation of millions of worlds, his potency remains inseparable. All the universes exist in him, and he is present in his fullness in every one of the atoms and that are scattered throughout the universe at one and the same time. Such is the primeval Lord whom
I adore the same Govinda, the primeval Lord, in whose praise men who are imbued with devotion sing the mantra suktas told by the Vedas by gaining their appropriate beauty, greatness, thrones, conveyances, and ornaments.
Which one I need to read? 10. Hare Krishna. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, residing in his own realm, Goloka with Radha, resembling his own spiritual figure. The embodiment of the ecstatic potency possessed of the 64 artistic activities in the company of her confidants, Sakis, embodiments of the extension of her bodily form, permitted and vitalized by his ever blissful spiritual rasa.
I worship Govinda, the premier Lord, who is Shamasundara, Krishna himself with inconceivable, innumerable attributes, whom the pure devotees see in the heart of the hearts, with the eye of devotion tinged with the salve of love.
I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who manifested himself personally as Krishna and the different avatars in the world in the forms of Rama, Nrisimha, Vamana, etc. as his subjective portions. Bhagavad Gita 7.1 Srinvatam swakata Krishna punya sravana kirtanaha hridiyanta histo hi abhadrani vidnoti suhritsatam nashtaprayesva abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttamasloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki tada rajastamo bhava kamalobhadayaschai cheta etar anavidam stitam sattve prasidati evam prasanna manaso bhagavat bhakti yogatah भगवत तत्व विज्ञानम मुक्त संगस्य जायते विद्यते हृदय ग्रंथे जिद्यन्ते सर्व समस्याः क्षीयन्ते चस्य कर्माणि दृष्टा एवात्मनीश्वरे. To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita is itself righteous activity, and for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge as he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees. He becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the mode of fashion and ignorance, and thus material lust and aberrances are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure godness, become enlivened by devotional service, and understand the signs of God perfectly. The Bhakti Yoga severs the odd knot of material affiliation and enables one to come at once to the stage of Asamshama Samraga and Asamshayam Samagram, understanding of the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead. Bhagavad Gita 1.2, Bhagavatam 1.2, 17 and 21. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the signs of Krishna. Next one. The next one.
That's it. Over. Yes. We'll read Bhagavad Gita 3.35. We completed, I think, yesterday. 3.36. 3.36. Arjuna Uvacha अतः केन प्रयुक्तोऽयं पापं चरति पुरुषाः अनिच्छान् अपि वार्षणेय balad eva niyojita. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts even unwillingly as if engaged by force? Purport. A living entity as part and parcel of the Supreme is originally spiritual, pure and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of the living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the super soul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse.
Sri Bhagavan Vaja Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajoguna Sambudhava Mahashanu Mahapapma Vidhi Enam Iva Iha Vairinam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is all the devouring sinful enemy of this world. When a living entity comes in contact with material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association with mode of passion. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust, as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transferred into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is the lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is a manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If therefore the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated into the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many of his ever increasing spiritual bliss, and living entities are parts and parcels of the spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of these independence or of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity of sense enjoyment, propensity of for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. This inquiry is beginning of the Vedanta Sutras, wherein it is said, Adhato Brahma Jignasa, one should inquire into the Supreme, and the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmadi Asyedo Nyadidarascha, or the origin of the everything is Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, the both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Rama, exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravana. By doing so, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. Here also in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord induces Arjuna to engage his wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies.
Bhagavad Gita 3.38. Dhumena Viyati Vayena Yata Adarsha Malina Yata Ulvena Avrata Garbha Tata Tena Idam Avtaram is covered. Translation: as fire is covered by smoke, as mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of its lust. Purport by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. There are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity, by which its pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that fire of the living spark can be little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits its Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position. For the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of a tree. Trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy lust by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance.
Bhagavad Gita 3.39 Avratam jnanam etena jnanino nityavairina kamarupena kaunteya dushparena lena cha. Translation. Thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. It is said in the Manusmriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus this material world is called Maitunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer.
Bhagavad Gita 3.40 Indriyani mano buddhir asya adhisthana uchyate eter vimobhyati esha jnanam avartya dehinam. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of living entity and bewilders him. Purport by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The enemy has captured different strategic position in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about the sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification, and as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of all lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. The false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 84, verse 13. Yasyatma buddhir gunavitri dhaduge swadhi kalatra dishu bhaumaji bhaumejya tidi yattirtha buddhi salilena karchit yaneshu abhigneshu sa eva go kara. A human being who identifies his body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsmen, who considers the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge, there is to be considered like an ass or a cow.
3.41 Tasmat Tvam Indriyani Adu Niyamaya Bharatara Sabha Papanam Prajaye Enam Gnana Vignana Nashanam. Translation. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Purport by Bhaktivedanta Swami A.C. Prabhupada. The Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroy the urge for self-realization and the specific knowledge of the self. Jnana refers to knowledge of self as distinguished from some non-self, or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. Vijnana refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and its relationship to Supreme Soul. It is explained thus in the Srimad Bhagavatam 2.9.31. Jnanam paramam guhyam me yad vijnana samana vitam sa rasam tad anagram cha gruhana gaditam maya. The knowledge of the self and the Supreme Self is very confidential and mysterious. But such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects by the Lord Himself. Bhagavad Gita gives us the general and specific knowledge of the self, the living entity. And the living entities are parts and parcel of the Lord, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. So far from the very beginning of life, one has to learn this Krishna consciousness, and thereby one may become fully Krishna consciousness and act accordingly. Lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, the natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So from any stage of life or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness. devotional service of the Lord and turn the lust into love of God, the highest perfection stage of human life.
Chapter 3, text 42. Indriyani parani ahur indriyebhya param manah manasastu para buddhi yo buddhi paratastu sa.
Translation. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Purport. The senses are different outlets for the activities of lust. Lust is reserved within the body, but is given vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions as described here ultimately ends in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is the determination and of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. Therefore, if the soul is directly engaged with the supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will automatically be engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, there is a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses, and mind is superior to the sense objects. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. Param dristva nivarte. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely sense objects, senses, and mind, and intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness, by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still it is strengthened by association with with Krishna and Krishna consciousness. There is every chance of falling down due to agitated mind. Text 43.
Chapter 3, text 43. Evam buddhe param buddhvaham samsthabhyatmanam atmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. Translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O my dear Arjuna, one should study the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer the insatiable enemy known as lust. Purport. This third chapter of Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without considering impersonal voidness the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and mind, by steady intelligence directed toward one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic posture can never help a man towards spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. Thus, in the Bhaktivedanta purports to the third chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of Karma Yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness.
Bhagavad Gita 4.1 Transcendental Knowledge. Chapter 4 Transcendental Knowledge. Bhagavad Gita 4.1 Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Imam vivasvate yogam proktavan aham avyayam vivasvan manave praha manur ikshvakave bravit. Translation. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivasvan, and the Vivasvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ishvaku. Purport. Herein we find the history of the Bhagavad Gita traced from a remote time when it was delivered to the royal order of all planets, beginning from the sun planet. The kings of all planets are especially meant for the protection of the inhabitants, and therefore the royal order should understand the science of Bhagavad Gita in order to be able to rule the citizens and protect them from material bondage to lust. Human life is meant for cultivation of spiritual knowledge in eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the executive heads of all states and all planets are obliged to impart this lesson to the citizens by education, culture, and devotion. In other words, the executive heads of all states are intended to spread the science of Krishna consciousness so that the people may take advantage of this great science and pursue a successful path, utilizing the opportunity of the human form of life. In this millennium, the sun god is known as Vivasvan, the king of the sun, which is the origin of all planets within the solar system. In the Brahma Samhita 5.52, it is stated, Yakchakshur esa savita sakala grahanam Raja samasta sura murthir asesha teja yasva yajnaya brahmati sambrata kalachakro govindam adipurusham tamaham bhajami. Let me worship. Lord Brahma said, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda, Krishna, who is the original person and under whose order the sun, which is the king of all planets, is assuming immense power and heat. The sun represents the eye of the Lord and traverses its orbit in obedience to his order. The sun is the king of the planets, and the sun god at present of the name Vivaswan rules the sun planet, which is controlling all other planets by supplying heat and light. He is rotating under the order of Krishna, and Lord Krishna originally made Vivaswan his first disciple to understand the science of Bhagavad Gita. The Gita is not, therefore, a speculative treatise for the insignificant mundane scholar, but is a standard book of knowledge coming down from time immemorial. In the Mahabharata, Shanti Parva 348:51 to 52, we can trace out the history of the Gita as follows. Treta Yuga Daucha Ya Tato Vivaswan Manave Dadau Manuscha Loka Brihti Ardham Sutaye Kave Dadau Ishwakunacha Katito Vyapya Lokan Avastitha. In the beginning of the millennium known as Treta Yuga, the science of the relationship with the Supreme was delivered by Vivaswan to Manu. Manu, being the father of mankind, gave it to his son Maharaj Ikshvaku, the king of this earth planet and forefather of the Raghu dynasty, in which Lord Ramachandra appeared. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita instead existed in human society from the time of Maharaj Ikshvaku. At the present moment, we have just passed through 5,000 years of the Kali Yuga, which lasts 432,000 years. Before this there was Dwapar Yuga, 800,000 years, and before that there was Treta Yuga, 1,200,000 years. Thus, some 205,000 years ago, Manu spoke the Bhagavad Gita to his disciple and son Maharaja Ikshvaku, the king of this planet Earth. The age of the current Manu is calculated to last some 305,300,000 years, of which 120,400,000 have passed. Accepting that before the birth of Manu, the Gita was spoken by the Lord to his disciple, the sun god Vivaswan. A rough estimate is that the Gita was spoken at least 120,400,000 years ago, and in human society it has been extant for 2 million years. It was re-spoken by the Lord again to Arjuna about 5,000 years ago. That is the rough estimate of the history of the Gita, according to the Gita itself and according to the version of the speaker, Lord Krishna, Lord Sri Krishna. It was spoken to the sun god Vivaswan because he is also a Kshatriya and is the father of all Kshatriyas, who are dependents of the sun god or the Surya Vamsha Kshatriyas. Because Bhagavad Gita is as good as the Vedas, being spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This knowledge of Apauruseya, superhuman, since the Vedic instructions are accepted as they are without human interpretation, the Gita must therefore be accepted without mundane interpretation. The mundane wranglers may speculate on the Gita in their own ways, but that is not Bhagavad Gita as it is. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita has to be accepted as it is from the disciplic succession, and it is described herein that the Lord spoke to the sun god spoke to his son Manu, and Manu spoke to his son Ikshvaku.
Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4.2. Evam parampara praptam evam rajasro vidu sakalena mahata yoganasta pranatava. The supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. It is clearly purported by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. It is clearly stated that the Gita was especially meant for the saintly kings because they were to execute its purpose in ruling over the citizens. Certainly, Bhagavad Gita was never meant for demoniac persons who would dissipate its value for no one's benefit and would devise all types of interpretations according to personal whims. As soon as the original purpose was scattered by the motives of the unscrupulous commentators, there arose the need to re-establish the disciplic succession. 5,000 years ago, it was dictated by the Lord Himself that the disciplic succession was broken, and therefore He declared the purpose of Gita appeared to be lost. In the same way, at the present moment, also there are so many editions of the Gita, especially in English, but almost all of them are not according to the authorized disciplic succession. There are innumerable interpretations rendered by different mundane scholars, but almost all of them do not accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, although Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, although they make a good business of the words of Sri Krishna. This spirit is demoniac because demons do not believe in God but simply enjoy the property of Supreme. Since there is a great need of an edition of Gita in English as it is received by Parampara, disciplic succession system, an attempt is made herewith to fulfill the great want. Bhagavad Gita accepted as it is a great boon to humanity, but if it is accepted as a treatise of philosophical speculations, it is simply a waste of time.
Chapter 4, Text 3. Saivayam mayate adya yoga prokta puratanaha bhakto sime sakacheti rahasyam hi etad uttamam. Translation. That very ancient science of the relationship with the Supreme is today told by me to you because you are my devotee as well as my friend and can therefore understand the transcendental mystery of this science. Purport. There are two classes of men, namely the devotee and the demon. The Lord selected Arjuna as a recipient of this great science, owing to his being a devotee of the Lord. But for the demon, it is not possible to understand this great mysterious science. There are a number of editions of this great book of knowledge. Some of them have commentaries by the devotees, and some of them have commentaries by the demons. Commentation by the devotee is real, whereas that of the demons is useless. Arjuna accepts Sri Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And any commentary on the Gita following in the footsteps of Arjuna is real devotional service to the cause of this great science. The demoniac, however, do not accept Lord Krishna as he is. Instead, they concoct something about Krishna and mislead general readers from the path of Krishna's instructions. Here is a warning about such misleading paths. One should try to follow the disciplic succession from Arjuna and thus be benefited by this great science of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 4, Text 4. Arjuna Vacha Aparam Bhavato Janma Param Janma Vivaswataha Katametat Vijaniyam Tvam Adau Proktavaniti.
Arjuna said the Sangha Vivashan is senior by birth to you. How am I to understand that in the beginning you instructed the sons to him? Purport. Arjuna is an accepted devotee of the Lord. So how could he not believe Krishna's words? The fact is that Arjuna is not inquiring for himself, but for those who do not believe in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. or for the demons who do not like the idea that Krishna should be accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For them only Arjuna inquires on this point, as if he were himself not aware of the personality of Godhead or Krishna. As it will be evident from the 10th chapter, Arjuna knew perfectly well that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the fountainhead of everything, and the last word in transcendence. Of course, Krishna also appeared as the son of Devaki on this earth. How Krishna remained the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the eternal person, is very difficult for an ordinary man to understand. Therefore, to clarify this point, Arjuna put this question before Krishna so that he himself could speak authoritatively. That Krishna is the supreme authority is accepted by the whole world, not only at present, but from time immemorial. And the demons alone reject him. Anyway, since Krishna is the authority accepted by all, Arjuna put this question before him in order that Krishna would be described himself without being depicted by the demons, who always try to distort him in a way understandable to the demons and their followers. It is necessary that everyone for his own interest know the signs of Krishna. Therefore, when Krishna himself speaks about himself, it is auspicious for all the worlds. To the demons, such explanations by Krishna himself may appear to be strange, because the demons always study Krishna from their own standpoint. But those who are devotees heartily welcome the statements of Krishna when they are spoken by Krishna himself. The devotees will always worship such authoritative statements of Krishna because they are always eager to know more and more about him. The atheist who consider Krishna an ordinary man may in this way come to know that Krishna is superhuman and that he is Sachinanda Vigraha, the eternal form of bliss and knowledge, and that he is transcendental, and that he is above the domination of the modes of material nature and above the influence of time and space. A devotee of Krishna like Arjuna is undoubtedly above any misunderstanding of the transcendental position of Krishna. Arjuna's putting this question before the Lord is simply an attempt by the devotee to defy the atheistic attitude of persons who consider Krishna to be an ordinary human being subject to the modes of material nature.
Chapter 4, verse 5. Sri Bhagavan Uvaja Bahuni me vyaditani janmani tava cha Arjuna tani aham veda sarvani natvam veda parantapa. Translation. The personality of Godhead said, many births both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. Purport by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In Brahma Samhita, we have information of many incarnations of the Lord. It is stated there, Advaita Achyuta Anadi Anandarupam Adyam Purana Purushan Navi Yavanam Cha Vedeshu Durlabha Adurlabha Atma Bhakto Govindamadi Purushan Tamaham Bhajami. I worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda Krishna, who is the original person, absolute, infallible, without beginning. Although expanded into unlimited forms, he is still same original. The oldest and the original, the oldest and the person always appearing as a fresh youth. Such eternal, blissful, all-knowing forms of the Lord are usually not understood by even the best Vedic scholars, but they are always manifest to pure unalloyed devotees. It is also stated in Brahma Samhita, Ramadimurtishu Kala Nemena Tishtan Nanavadara Magarod Bhuneshu Gindu Krishna Swayam Sambhavat Parama Bhuvanyo Govindamadi Purushan Tamam Bhajami. I worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead Govinda, who is always situated in various incarnations such as Rama, Narasimha, and many sub-incarnations as well, but who is the original personality of Godhead known as Krishna and who incarnates personally also. In the Vedas also it is said that the Lord, although one without a second, manifests himself in innumerable forms. He is like a Vaidurya stone which changes color yet still remains one. All these multiforms are understood by the pure unalloyed devotees, but not by a simple study of the Vedas. Vedesha Durlabha Durlabha Atma Bhakta. Devotees like Arjuna are constant companions of Lord, and whenever the Lord incarnates, the associate devotees also incarnate in order to serve the Lord in different capacities. Arjuna is one of these devotees, and in this verse it is understood that some millions of years ago, when Lord Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to the sun god Vivaswan, Arjuna in a direct capacity was also present. But the difference between the Lord and Arjuna is that Lord remembered the incident, whereas Arjuna could not remember. That is the difference between the part and parcel living entity and Supreme Lord. Although Arjuna is addressed herein as the mighty hero who could subdue the enemies, he is unable to recall what had happened in various past births. Therefore, a living entity, however great he may be in material estimation, can never equal the Supreme Lord. Anyone who is a constant companion of the Lord is certainly a liberated person, but he cannot be equal to the Lord. The Lord is described in Brahma Samhita infallible, Achyuta, which means that he never forgets himself, even though he is in material contact. Therefore, the Lord and the living entity can never be equal in all respects, even if the living entity is as celebrated as Arjuna. Although Arjuna is a devotee of the Lord, he sometimes forgets the nature of the Lord, but by the divine grace, a devotee can at once understand the infallible condition of the Lord, whereas a non-devotee or a demon cannot understand the transcendental nature. Consequently, these descriptions in Gita cannot be understood by demoniac brains. Krishna remembered acts which were performed by him millions of years before, but Arjuna could not, despite the fact that both Krishna and Arjuna are eternal in nature. We may also note herein that a living entity forgets everything due to his change of body, but Lord remembers because he does not change his Satchidananda body. He is Advaita, which means there is no distinction between his body and himself. Everything in relation to him is spirit, whereas the conditioned soul is different from his material body. And because the Lord's body and self are identical, his position is always different from that of ordinary living entity, even when he descends to the material platform. The demons cannot adjust themselves to the transcendental nature of the Lord, which the Lord himself explains in the following verse.
Bhagavad Gita 4.6 Ajopi san avyattatma bhutanam ishwaropi san prakritim swam adhistaya sambhavami atmamayayam. Translation: Although I am unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all living entities, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. Purport: The Lord has spoken about the peculiarity of his birth. Although he may appear like an ordinary person, he remembers everything of his many past births, whereas a common man cannot remember what he has done even a few hours before. If someone is asked what he did exactly at the same time one day earlier, it would be very difficult for a common man to answer immediately. He would surely have to dredge his memory to recall what he was doing exactly at the same time one day before. And yet, men often dare claim to be God or Krishna. One should not be misled by such meaningless claims. Then again, the Lord explains his Prakriti or his form. Prakriti means nature, as well as Swarupa or one's own form. The Lord says that he appears in his own body. He does not change his body as a common living entity changes from one body to another. The conditioned soul may have one kind of body in the present birth, but he has a different body in the next birth. In the material world, the living entity has no fixed body, but transmigrates from one body to another. The Lord, however, does not do so. Whenever he appears, he does so in the same original body by his eternal potency. In other words, Krishna appears in this material world in his original eternal form with two hands holding a flute. He appears exactly in his eternal body, uncontaminated by his material world. Although he appears in the same transcendental body and is Lord of the universe, it still appears that he takes his birth like an ordinary living entity. And although his body does not deteriorate like a material body, it still appears that Lord Krishna grows from childhood to boyhood and from boyhood to youth. But astonishingly enough, he never ages beyond youth. At the time of the battle of Kurukshetra, he had many grandchildren at home, or in other words, he had sufficiently aged by material calculations. Still, he looked just like a young man, 20 or 25 years old. We never see a picture of Krishna in old age because he never grows old like us. Although he is the oldest person in the whole creation, past, present, and future, neither his body nor his intelligence ever deteriorates or changes. Therefore, it is clear that in spite of his being in the material world, he is the same unborn, eternal form of bliss and knowledge, changeless in his transcendental body and intelligence. Factually, his appearance and disappearance are like the sun's rising, moving before us and then disappearing from our sight. When the sun is out of sight, we think that the sun has set, and when the sun is before our eyes, we think that the sun is on the horizon. Actually, the sun is always in its fixed position, but owing to our defective, insufficient senses, we calculate the appearance and disappearance of the sun in the sky. And because Lord Krishna's appearance and disappearance are completely different from that of an ordinary, common living entity, it is evident that he is eternal, blissful knowledge by his internal potency, and is never contaminated by material nature. The Vedas also confirm that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is unborn, yet he still appears to take his birth in multi manifestations. The Vedic supplementary literatures also confirm that even though the Lord appears to be taking his birth, he is still without change of body. In the Bhagavatam, he appears before his mother as Narayana with 4 hands and the decorations of the 6 hands of full opulences. His appearance in his original eternal form is his causeless mercy bestowed upon the living entity so that they can concentrate on the Supreme Lord as He is and not on mental concoctions or imaginations, which the impersonalist wrongly thinks the Lord's forms to be. The word Maya or Atma Maya refers to the Lord's causeless mercy according to the Vishwa Kosha dictionary. The Lord is conscious of all of his previous appearances and disappearances, but a common living entity forgets everything about his past body as soon as he gets another body. He is the Lord of all living entities because he performs wonderful and superhuman activities while he is on this earth. Therefore, the Lord is always the same absolute truth and is without differentiation between his form and self or between his equality and body. Because between his quality and body, a question may now be raised as to why the Lord appears and disappears in this world. This is explained in the next verse. Bhagavad Gita. Okay. We'll stop. So every millennium he is going to appear in his original form. That means Krishna only. He told clearly. No, Vishnu, this one, that one. It's ruled out. Here clearly he told now. Every millennium he is going to appear in his original form.
No, no, no. Every millennium, Prabhu.
Every millennium. No, they don't know.
I'll check and share, Prabhuji.
No, it is mentioned somewhere also. It's every millennium he comes.
Only this Manu, this 72.
Manu nahi, Krishna.
No, in the 72 Manu, only comes as.
No, no, it's a cycle. After the four
Yeah.
yugas, again, this will repeat.
No, here there is no, I read, no, just now I read.
I'll check the other one.
You want to sing, Prabhu?
Prabhu, he tells, no, that is. Okay, we'll see that then.
Yeah, I'll share.
You send it.
One day of Brahma, the Swayam Bhagavan comes.
Prabhu?
One day of Brahma, one time the Lord comes.
In the original form.
Swayam Bhagavan comes.
So in every millennium he comes.
One day of Brahma. Millennium can be called.
One day of Brahma.
That happened 5,000.
So one yuga.
No, 1,000 Chakra yugas.
Thousand yugas.
Comes once.
One. So the
Chalo.
Millennium, I don't know how it is calculated. Lord comes once in the day of
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma. Bandhamui savadhan mate. Jahar prasade bhai e bhavatoriya jai. Krishna prapti ho jaha hoite. Guru mukha padma vakya chitete koriya kya. Hare na kori ho mane asha. Shri Guru Charane Rati aise uttama gati. जे प्रसादे पूरे सर्व आशा. जे प्रसादे पूरे सर्व आशा. चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाशा जाते वेदे गाय जहाँ चरितो वेदे गाय जहाँ चरितो श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनर बंधु श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनर बंधु लोकनाथ लोकेर जीवाना लोकनाथ लोकेर जीवाना हाँ हाँ प्रभु करो दया देहो मोरे पद छाया ए बेजाज गुशिक त्रिभुवना शीला प्रभु पालो इलो शरण शीला गुरुदेव पतित पवन जय प्रभु पदा जय प्रभु पदा जय प्रभु पदा जय प्रभु पदा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमति भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी इति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवी गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Jai Gurudev ki Jai. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates, by him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor, and the Lord and master of the devotees. O Loknath Goswami, O master, be merciful unto me. Give me the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the three worlds. We take the shelter of lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.